Happy Friday, everyone. Welcome to the Sustainability Happy Hour with the School of Global Environmental Sustainability. I am your co-host, Micah Bennett, and this is...
Pat?
Hi, Pat.
Should I say more than that?
If you want to.
Say more than that.
I don't know.
Okay. Yeah, why not? My name is Pat Keys, and I'm lead scientist at SoGES, which is the two-syllable acronym for the very large named organization that Micah opened with, School of Global Environmental Sustainability. And it's Friday, and we don't need to talk about the election, but like, woof, right? Like,
yikes, as the kids say.
Yikes.
This whole week. I'm just happy it's Friday. I'm so happy it's Friday.
Same. But okay, I'll just say one thing.
All right.
We should have known to expect that this would not be like, we know tonight who wins a lot of things because it's 2020. And 2020, if anything else, has taught us to expect to be uncomfortable.
I'm leaning into it.
You're leaning into it. Okay.
Leaning into it.
I like it.
All right, let's
Okay.
we're gonna go right along because we have a really cool guest today.
We do.
You want to tease who our guest is, Pat?
Dr. Carrie Chennault. I hope I said that right. And if not, I will get corrected in a few minutes. And she is a social scientist doing all sorts of really interesting, cool work, looking at questions of environmental justice, feminist political ecology, and sustainable agriculture, all sorts of very interesting things and more. And we'll only be able to talk about a small amount of that, but let's get going so we can talk about as much as possible.
Yep.
Fun facts.
Fun facts. Mine's fast. It's my birthday on Sunday.
Okay. Whoa, happy birthday. Yeah.
Happy birthday to me.
Yeah, totally.
I will be turning 26, and it's a big year
Hey.
because that's the year that you get kicked off your parents' insurance.
Whoa.
But it's okay because I work for CSU, and CSU has pretty good insurance.
CSU has really good insurance, yeah. It is a big year. I'm not going to tell you how old I am. I'm not turning 26 on my next birthday. Okay, so my fun fact, though, I just told Micah it has to do with the word Jane. I didn't even share the right screen so that it would be a total surprise. Oh, wait a second. I can only share one screen. Okay, hold on.
Come on. It's like we've been doing this for months.
I know. Buckle up. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
This is a random fact. It's not even fun. It's a random fact. Okay, ready? Who's that guy? That's me many years ago next to Jane Goodall. Jane Goodall is the one that's the cool thing here. And that's my friend Danielle from college. But so in college, my son was learning about Jane Goodall today, and I was like, hey, did you know I have a picture with Jane Goodall? And he was like, I don't really care. Then I found the picture. Then I found the picture, and I was like, holy cow, like, I can't believe I was standing next to Jane Goodall. It was this cool luncheon thing that my university managed to get her there for, and she's amazing. She's
cool.
She's just this amazing person, like tireless, like so good, just an amazing individual. So I was looking at the picture earlier today, and I was like, hey, I should share that. Okay, that's it. Me and Jane and Danielle. Okay, that's it. Fun fact.
Fun fact. So fun. So random. On to news.
Short. On to news. Okay, I gotta share the right screen again. Here we go. Boom, boom, boom. Ready, set, go. Which one are we doing first?
Whichever.
Doing this.
Sounds like we're doing that one first.
So
if you watched last week, we talked about this ballot measure, and the outcome of this ballot measure has been decided. And so
by a thin margin.
By a very thin margin.
Yeah.
And so what this was, it was on the ballot in Colorado, and it was to make the state reintroduce gray wolves into the Rocky Mountain area where they're not currently. And so it is a historic ballot measure because it's the first time that voters have been the ones to say, hey, you need to do this. Normally, that is something that is decided by the federal government. And so it was Proposition 114. It directs state wildlife managers to bring wolves back to Colorado's western mountains by 2024. Is the timeline that they have. And
that's soon.
That is soon. That's
like when it comes to that level of project, that's
yeah. And Oh, regarding the fact that it's the voters that will decide, the article said in a move criticized as ballot box biology, which I'm not entirely sure what that means. Is that meaning like the voters are deciding on biology instead of biologists?
My sense is that this sort of thing is typically decided just by like a Fish and Wildlife agency, like a kind of like it's more of a bureaucratic decision rather than just saying, hey, let's put it to the vote. And which is a weird way to phrase it in some ways, because it's not like, I don't know. I thought that was a strange phrase in that article.
Yeah, I didn't really understand it. And then one other important point to this was that one complicating factor is that the Trump administration recently decided to remove gray wolves from the endangered species list.
Right.
And so it's saying that if this ballot survives expected legal challenges, the fact that the gray wolves are no longer on this list would make actually Colorado's tasks easier, since state wildlife managers won't need permission from the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to manage the species. But it might also mean that the state won't get federal funds to do it. So kind of like a double-edged sword there. Go ahead.
No, please.
Well, I was just going to say, based on this article, the opponents of the measure, which include like a lot of cattle ranchers, because wolves can be a threat to cattle ranchers, were surprised that it passed with such a thin margin. The argument was that people on the Front Range in the Denver metro area that are not going to be terribly impacted by this would be like, yeah, for sure, let's do it. But in fact, like, it was split a lot more evenly than people thought. But it did win, and it's happening. So, so that's what's happening with Prop 114.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on. So the next news piece is about Hurricane Eta. They don't have names anymore. Once you get to the end of the designated alphabet for hurricanes, they start giving them Greek letters. And we're all the way to Eta, which, if you're not up on your Greek, that's the fifth one. Alpha,
I
beta,
did
gamma,
not know that. I just
zeta,
thought
Eta.
Eta was like a name.
Yeah, like a jazz singer, maybe. It's not. It's the fifth of the Greek letter named hurricanes. And so it happened, I think it was earlier this week, but it became so strong and that they think it was a Category 5 hurricane, but they don't know that, because the 3 different aircraft that they were going to have flying through it all were grounded for a variety of different reasons, mechanical failures, et cetera. So they actually don't have the exact kind of data that they would need to properly categorize it at its peak intensity. But pretty much everybody's calling it a Category 5 hurricane, if not in like proper intensity naming. And sure enough, the impacts are profound for this area in terms of Central America, massive flooding, et cetera. But something else to keep in mind is that it's not done. And this is from the National Hurricane Center for a projected path for where Eta is headed. And maybe surprise, surprise, or not so much because it's 2020. It's set to maintain its tropical storm status and sweep by the tip of Florida. And that's, again, another hurricane hitting the United States, or another tropical storm, I should say. Another reason this is of note is that this would be the second, what's the record? I wrote the stat down. The second ever Category 5 hurricane to form in the Atlantic during November. So this month is typically sort of the tail end of the hurricane season. And so this would be the second Category 5 hurricane that's ever occurred in November. And this is consistent with expectations of climate change. Climate change research is suggesting that the number of very intense hurricanes is expected to go up by the end of the century, at least, if not sooner, for all sorts of climate reasons. And we'll make sure to link. There was a brand new paper that was published. I'm not even sure if the actual published version is out yet, but it was accepted earlier this year. So we'll make sure that latest kind of hurricane science link is in the show notes after we post this.
Yeah.
But I'll just stop there.
You know what's funny is I remember back in like April and May, we were sharing a couple of articles, and the articles were saying, we're predicting this to be a really active hurricane season.
Really active hurricane season.
And turns out they were right.
Turns out.
If you are
it?
just tuning in, you are watching the SoGES Sustainability Happy Hour, where we run down some sustainability news and we interview a special guest.
We also share some fun facts, and Julie Kallenberger says, "Happy birthday, Micah."
Oh, thank you, Julie.
And a cake emoji. That's a nice cake emoji.
Ooh.
So, hey, look at this.
Mary Hill's
boom.
Here too.
Mary Hill, boom, 26, woohoo. Mary Hill was our guest last time.
She is a visiting fellow with SoGES.
That's right. The whole team is out. The whole squad.
The whole squad is out. So like I said, we interview a special guest, and we're about to do that right now.
Yes.
If we're ready, if Carrie's ready.
Thumbs up. Ready to go?
I think so.
Thumbs up. Okay. Ready, set, welcome.
Thank you.
Hi, Carrie.
Hi. How are you doing?
Doing well. Doing well. How are you doing this Friday?
I'm doing well. Having slight technical difficulty. There we go. I couldn't get it to full screen. Now I can see you better.
Perfect.
I'm doing well, all things considered. I think I'm feeling the end of a long, very, very long week. But I'm excited to be here with you both, and happy birthday, Micah.
Thank you. Now the whole world knows it's my birthday.
Now the whole world, all millions of our viewers and everything. So, okay. So Carrie, did I say your last name right?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Whew,
Yes.
Phew. We've had some mispronunciations on the show before, so it's nice.
It's terribly embarrassing.
We're doing okay. It's very embarrassing. Well, maybe, okay, so we briefly kind of shared kind of your background, what your interests are, but maybe, Carrie, you could just briefly talk about, what you study, what you're doing at CSU. Yeah, just a brief background, if you don't mind.
So, brief background, I am a postdoctoral fellow, as you mentioned, at CSU, and this is my second year in that position. Prior to that, I was studying at Iowa State University. I earned a PhD in sustainable agriculture and minored in women's and gender studies. So if you can think about my background, you could say that I am a feminist geographer who studies food and agriculture. And specifically, I study that in the context of the United States, and both in urban and rural locations, as well as during my postdoc, I've started studying food and agriculture in the context of prisons, so in the United States.
When you say that you are would you say a sustainable geographer?
A feminist.
Feminist geographer.
Yes.
What do you mean by geographer? Like you study maps?
Well, so geography can mean a lot of different things. Like me, geography is very interdisciplinary. So I am a human geographer. Feminist geography is a subfield of human geography. So you could think of it as the study of space, place, and power.
Yes. That is a helpful description.
And you can use food and agriculture as a lens through which to study those things. So that's what I do.
Gotcha.
So just to, for some of our viewers, they might not be as well versed in kind of feminist philosophy and how that might infuse some of your work. And so do you think you could kind of, I know this is like asking you to explain textbooks worth of material right now, but do you think you could briefly describe what does it mean to say have a feminist perspective in this context?
So it can mean a lot of things, but I would say for my work, I go into my research with a set of assumptions that are what I would label as being feminist. So I'm specifically looking at how power manifests itself in society, both in relationships among humans, but also human and environmental relations. And so I am looking at things like people's everyday experiences. That's a really common theme in feminist research. How do we study the everyday to learn about power at multiple scales? And so that might look like both studying like race, class, and gender. That's a very common approach to feminist scholarship, to looking at how power organizes space through these hierarchical categories of race, class, gender, ability, age, and so forth. So another thing that's really common in feminist research is what's called positionality. So that also means looking at power, not just out there in the field that I'm studying, but looking at the relationship between the university as a place of knowledge production and then the communities that we research. So really thinking about the ways that academia, that researchers, that science, that we're all implicated in these very power relations that we study. And that's been particularly important for me because I do a lot of community engaged research. And so using these concepts of reflexivity, positionality, I can really think about my relationship with the communities that I'm doing research with.
So in that,
sorry, that's the hardest part about Zoom stuff is that like it's so hard to like jump on people's words. I was wondering if we could pull the lens out even a little bit wider. And so you're a social scientist, right?
Yes.
And so what does that mean? And then like how does that fit into the world of sustainability, where I think a lot of people think that just sustainability is like climate science and like in the lab,
right.
like in the lab with your petri dish. So like where does social science fit in there?
So that is an even broader question. We're asking about geography or asking about feminist research. So as a social scientist, well, I specifically am looking at how society interacts with food systems, agricultural systems, environmental systems. And so that's really where this gets into sustainability, because people make decisions, right? People make decisions every day that impact the environment, that impact other societies, locally, regionally, globally. And so really understanding that interface between human actions, decisions, visions for the future, those are all things that social scientists can research.
Cool. Yeah, that makes sense. Pat, did you have something?
So I have like a million questions, so I'm going to try and choose one. So I really want to get to your kind of some of your current work right now about looking at how this fits into sort of prison. I think it's prison agriculture or agriculture, like horticulture in prisons. But before we get there, to me, this seems like so I'm in academia, right? So I'm aware of a lot of these words. I've even written some of them down and used them or tried to use them appropriately. But to translate some of these ideas and ways of thinking about questions and ways of thinking about understanding the world, how has that gone when you go to say, I assume you worked with the extension in Iowa?
Yes.
So, was that challenging? How much of this was like an exercise in getting on the same page and then conducting research? Or is it the kind of thing where when you're conducting the research, you don't necessarily need to explain sort of your background in these different disciplines? I'm just trying to wrap my head around how complex that must be.
So it's incredibly complex. Like I will say, for instance, oftentimes when I tell people I do feminist research, their first response is, "Oh, you research gender." And I have to step back a few moments, well, many people who do feminist research study gender, and gender is certainly a lens through which one can study power. But, and so there's definitely historically a really close tie between feminist studies and gender studies, but they are not the same thing. So yeah, there is a little bit of just like helping shape people's misconceptions about what I do. But I was really, really lucky working with Extension. I had wonderful teams who were very supportive of my research. And, rather than trying to explain to people all of the theory, the methodology, the scholarship part,
right.
I usually focus on the topics because I think that's what people can relate to at the end of the day.
Yeah.
And that's whether it's people in Extension, whether it's the communities that I work with, or whether it's other scientists. I think really starting with the topics are a good way to introduce people. And then you can say, okay, this part of this research is that this is how it's feminist, or this is how it's geography.
Right. And when you do that, how often is that surprising to people for them to realize like, oh, this is feminist scholarship? Is that surprising to people, or is it not? They're like, oh, okay, that makes sense.
You know, I think it's certainly a learning curve for some people, but
Okay.
I think people are just generally excited about, you know, learning about new thoughts and ideas and
Absolutely.
approaches.
And so, do you want to tell us a little bit about more in detail about your current work with the prison ag?
Sure. So I actually began this work a little bit over a year ago when I first started my postdoc. Professor Joshua Sabika, who's in the Department of Sociology, is the primary investigator for this project. And he was really just wonderful in bringing me onto his team. He has what he calls his prison agriculture lab, and it's made up of myself, Josh, several graduate students, and at times there have been undergraduates working with the project as well. And so one of our goals was really to do a first of its kind study of prison agriculture in the United States. There have been many case studies on it and maybe focused on certain geographic regions, but there's never really been anything that has gotten this like top-down view of what is the state of prison agriculture in the United States. Further, the project really for the first time thought of agriculture very expansively. So a lot of times when you read about prison agriculture, you might read about a horticulture project, or you might read about people who are working at, say, a chicken factory that they're doing meat processing and poultry processing, but rarely do you see those things studied together. And so that was really part of the, I guess, motivating force behind the research, is really to understand the politics of prison agriculture from this like more encompassing viewpoint. And that was kind of the motivation. And since then, we worked on calling every single state-operated adult prison in the United States. We had a team and months on the phone calling and just really talking to people, trying to confirm, you know, do you have this type of program, or do you have this type of activity? And just getting a picture of what that landscape looks like. So that was the start of the project. We had other plans to go and do like more in-depth qualitative research, but of course that's been put on hold with the pandemic, as you can imagine.
Right.
And so what would you say is your end goal with this research? Like, what are you going to do with the data?
Oh. So we've already written one manuscript together. So that was kind of a starting point for really exploring these issues of the politics of prison agriculture and really kind of questioning some of the traditional lenses that both academics and policymakers and practitioners really go in approaching programs. So trying to really critically examine some of these key assumptions about, for instance, rehabilitation, because there are a lot of assumptions about how rehabilitation occurs through prisons, and food and agriculture in these various forms is often touted as being rehabilitative. So that's really, I think, our first step, is just this critical examination of the prison landscape and looking at rehabilitation in the prison landscape.
And let me really oversimplify things here for a second. Is prison agriculture good or bad? Pat's over here shaking his head.
No, I think it's a good question. Like, in terms of like, you almost throw out like this very simple way of thinking about it, but it probably contains a lot of
like, obviously I know the answer is more complex, but
right. Well, no, it's a good place to start. And I think that this very desire to categorize it as good or bad leads to maybe sometimes oversimplified assumptions, like an assumption that prison gardening is good, or that work in a food factory is bad, right? And it leads to these like easy, simple, heuristic categorizations, rather than looking at the complex relations that occur, rather than looking at the differences in place, rather than looking at people's experiences and their complexities. So I guess the answer is our goal is to really get away from simplistic labels and actually add the nuance, add the complexities, and start thinking about how it can be both.
Yeah, cool.
The other thing I think that we're asking, which may be also a second answer to your question, is really thinking about, and this is in, I think a lot of people can relate to this question in light of the Black Lives Matter movement and the call to defund the police and other calls for the abolition of prisons. So I think one of our questions is, does prison agriculture, does it actually build up the institution of prisons in the United States? Does it prop it up? And if so, how? Does it allow incarceration to expand? Does it give a glossy shine to prisons? Or does it actually, is there something about prison agriculture that can be used to even work towards a future and, this whole idea of prison abolition? Is there a way that prison agriculture can lend to that type of future? And it's really, that of course itself is not an easy question to answer, but those are some of the things that we're thinking about, is how to align, our research with that sort of, what they call abolition praxis.
So to return to something earlier, in terms of thinking of sort of how does power manifest and exert itself in different contexts. And to me, prisons are one of a really good example of a multi-layered extreme example of power over someone else and people that are disproportionately affected by these power relations, multi-layered, historical, racial, institutional. And are there other examples of systems like that are these extreme, because to me, prisons, especially in the United States, are these extreme examples of disproportionate imbalances of power? And then and sort of bearing out the historical legacy of those imbalances in power. And are there other examples that are sort of like that in terms of these historically entwined, multi-layered sort of extreme examples that maybe we ought to be better aware of, sort of like kind of incarcerated labor?
I think there are so many answers to that. I mean, one could look at immigrant labor, I think, in the United States, and just immigration policies. And so that could be one example. I also think you can just look at food insecurity in the United States and really think about the history of that. Because, I mean, and I think that's why food to me is so compelling, because, it is this essential thing that we all, we need to live. It is very constitutive of our daily lives, right? And so to think that when food is political, when food, I can't remember there's a Black geographer, I think, that talked about food as a political weapon, because it is so essential to our lives. Anything that creates all of these obstacles for access, obstacles that are very racialized, that are gendered, that are classed. So we might not think of food as something that's quite, it certainly doesn't have that, it's not as easy to locate as a prison, right? Because a prison seems so, it has clear boundaries, it has walls, it definitely keeps people in and out. But, food access, one could look at it in kind of the same way in the United States.
Yeah.
I was just looking at oh, go ahead, Pat.
Well, I just, one kind of in this context of sort of you were talking about how prison agriculture might be rehabilitative or contribute to that. Just building on that kind of concept of rehabilitation, does this project extend kind of post-prison, post-release, in terms of sort of looking at parolees and whether or not this persists as a pathway towards rehabilitation or supportive of that post-incarceration?
So right now, our project is not specifically looking at that. However, Professor Sabika has relationships, and he's worked with organizations in the past that have worked with people post-incarceration. One area of research that I know that scholars are trying to examine, but there's just not enough, there haven't been really in-depth studies of yet, is this very idea you're talking about, looking at what happens to people. So much of the labor in agriculture that's done in prisons is touted as being vocational training. And that is the form of rehabilitation. And this is one thing that we're very closely examining: how are state governments, how are they justifying this labor? And often it is as vocational training. However, there's not necessarily at a large scale compelling data or studies that really tell us whether or not it is working. And I think one of the other critical questions when we're looking at power and rehabilitation is, what type of vocation does this labor set people up to perform? And so I think that's really another critical question that we're looking at. What does that do to people when we're telling them that this is the type of labor, that you should be going into post-incarceration?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that feels problematic on all sorts of levels in many ways, just also given the historical legacy of racism, slavery, and prejudice in this country. Okay, so I think you were about to ask a different question or jump onto a different topic, Micah?
Yeah.
No?
Yeah. Well, I really like asking people to define things that I don't know. And so I was looking back at your research website, and you talk about political ecology and Black geographies. And now that we know more about what geography means, I think I have an idea. But what does Black geographies mean?
Well, so Black geographies is a subfield of geography, human geography, but also it can overlap with physical geography as well. And I would really say that it is this study of the politics of place that Black people, Black communities inhabit, and especially in the face of anti-Blackness in our society.
Gotcha.
Yes.
I see how that would intersect with the work that you are doing.
Yeah.
And just to the phrase political ecology, we're going to have a glossary in the show notes, by the way. Because I think political ecology is a really interesting field in its own right, and it's, but it's not like you would rarely find a political ecology course in, say, a college of ecology or a school of ecology, right? Maybe you would, maybe in a graduate course. So could you briefly explain political ecology? Is that too much of an ask?
No, it's not too much of an ask. So there's a reason why you won't find it in an ecology department. And that is because political ecology is a subfield of geography. So that's the first. And also, I would say anthropology too. So when I go to conferences in political ecology, it's typically 40% geographers, 40% anthropologists, and maybe 20% sociologists and others. So it really is.
And maybe 1%, like one really confused ecologist. Like, what? I just go.
But that's not to discount the ecologists. I know that there are many ecologists who are, embedded in that literature and that academic
Absolutely,
community. So it's not to be exclusive. That's just my general,
totally.
very informal feel survey of when I go to political ecology conferences. To, I guess, define political ecology, which is its own, field that's had decades of history, and I specifically kind of am in the subfield of that, like feminist political ecology, but really looking at how power manifests in relations among humans and with the environment. And so it has a history of looking at like natural resources and really the politics that are shaping people's access to, decisions around, interactions with their environments.
Mm.
And is there a little bit of, because I was reading a little bit about the history of political ecology the other day, and it also seemed like it was entwined a little bit with almost like disaster studies in a way, in understanding like at post-disaster, like how kind of power manifests in these communities. Is that right? Was I reading something that was not accurate?
I mean, sure, there are people who study that. Absolutely.
Okay.
I wouldn't say that that's the only thing that people study. You know, there are a lot of people who, really great researchers who do political ecology of water and looking at water use. And really, for instance, you know, as a feminist political ecologist, there are people who are looking at women's access to water in a specific country, say maybe like in India, and tracing their daily lives and what it means to have, you know, get access to water, to provide it for their families. That could be one thing. I look at my doctoral research really looked at the political ecology of food justice in Iowa. So looking at these issues of food access and who was making the decisions around food access, how are the problems being framed, what were people's actual daily lives, people who are experiencing food insecurity, what are their lives like on a day-to-day basis trying to access food.
Okay.
I won't ask you to define anything else.
I make no promises.
I'm kind of wondering, I want to know a little bit more like about you. How did you get into this field of, you know, both like sustainability and your individual interests, and like what drew you to it, and like what kind of keeps you going?
That is such a multi-layered question, but a really good question. A little bit about me, and this is important, right? Like, so I talk about being a feminist, and this is what it is, placing myself in this research, right?
And like, I'm not gonna lie, I told a lot of my friends, I was like, we get to interview this really cool lady scientist. And so
so background, I grew up in rural Northeast Texas and a small town. My family, you know, if you go like on both sides, came from farming families, but and we did have a farm outside of town growing up, but I grew up in a small town, and I didn't really, you know, give too much thought to it growing up. Like in the spring, I would, you know, go and hang out with the baby calves when they were born and name them, and you know, I would go fishing, and I would harvest a lot of pecans. We have so many pecan trees on the farm, and so I spent some time doing that as a kid. And I think, but I never really thought about food and agriculture as a system. And you know, I ate every day. I mean, I talk about like what, you know, food means, like we do this act every day, but I never really thought about the politics of it. I never really thought about the relationship of what was going on in my family and my community to the larger world.
And like, you could even argue that you had a closer relationship to food than most people did, you know, living on a farm.
I think we all have a close relationship to food. I think they're just different relationships.
Interesting.
I mean, like I said, we must eat every day, and even not eating every day is a relationship to food. It's just a different relationship. Yeah. And so I had this background, and actually a lot of, you know, people in my family were involved in the grocery business. My grandfather had a small country town grocery store. And so I grew up with these stories around food, and food was important. Food and family, but I also, I think, grew up in a society, and I think this is true anywhere in the United States, but certainly in rural Texas, where issues of race, class, and gender inequality were very, very apparent to me from an early age. So even though I didn't connect the two together, like I didn't really understand the politics of food and its connection to these broader systems, I did from a very, very early age start understanding some of these power dynamics that were all around me. And eventually I wound my way into to Iowa to go to graduate school. And it was the graduate program in sustainable agriculture there. And that also is an incredibly wonderful interdisciplinary program. I think it crosses over 20 different departments at the university.
Wow.
So people who were in the hard biophysical sciences, engineering, social sciences, humanities, we were all together in the same program. And I think that also really just made me that much more passionate about studying science from this like alternative perspective of looking at power relations, because even though we had this really wide breadth of people, and there were certainly a lot of people interested in food justice and looking at social justice issues in agriculture, I felt like there's space for more of that to happen. So that just got me excited, and I just kept following that path. And I had an opportunity to work with Iowa State Extension for 3 years during my PhD, and that's the rest is history.
And what about the work that you do? What's one thing that really inspires you and keeps you going?
Definitely my community collaborators. I think that, just realizing that we can change academia, we can change the university, and have a different type of land grant mission. Land grant university. So Iowa State University, where I did my PhD, was land grant university. Colorado State University is the land grant university. Mm-hmm. And it has a history of, colonization, like land dispossession for Indigenous people. It has a history of racism, and all of those things are wound up in the university. But how can we actually change it? How can we do a different type of research? How can we do a different type of engagement? And I think I get my energy with trying to change that paradigm, and then also just really working closely with community partners to help them with their goals and really to create the futures that they want to build.
So just to chime in really quickly, if you're joining us now, this is the SoGES Sustainability Happy Hour. We are interviewing Dr. Carrie Chennault on like a huge number of things. And we're getting to the tail end of the show. But before we leave, you're also a Sustainable Leadership Fellow right now.
Yes.
And so we've had a bunch of past SLFs on the show. You might be the first current SLF. Is that right?
I think so.
Yeah. But the difference between past cohorts of the SLF program and this year's cohort is everybody's online. So I guess one thing, what has that been like for you? You've been, because if you don't know it, the Sustainable Leadership Fellowship Program at SoGES is something for advanced PhD students and postdocs to learn more about science policy, science communication, and sort of almost like getting the science that people are doing and connecting that with the broader world, kind of very broadly speaking. And so I guess, could you just briefly talk about how that experience has been so far?
Sure. Well, I've been really grateful to have the program, and the program has us broken off into pods of 5 in our cohort. So in addition to the actual workshops that we do, we also get to have these breakouts where we'll, go and meet for an hour with our cohort that's in our pod. So I think that's been really, I love my pod. They're wonderful. They're like totally different areas of research than me. So they probably, when I talk, they may not know what I'm talking about half the time, but they're just really enthusiastic, energetic. And I think that energy is something that I just build off of, that I've really needed this year. And yeah, because it can be really pretty isolating working remotely and working without, being able to go and see people. So that, I think that's probably the disadvantage is that I haven't gotten to really know the larger group, but it's been very good to connect with the pod.
And I just realized that we actually did have another current SLF. Zach Labe was on the show. He doesn't happen to be in your pod, is he?
No.
Oh, okay. Because that's emblematic of the diversity of the SLF program, where he's a climate geoscientist, science communicator guy, not a political ecologist. That's cool. I'm glad the pod program. I don't know much about what's happening in the program, just also because it's all digital. So there's all these other things happening that you're just not a part of. So I'm glad to hear that's going well. Okay, so we're getting to the end of the show. Do you want to ask the final question, Micah?
I will. Before we ask the final question, is there anything we didn't touch on that you want to talk about?
No, I really enjoyed talking with you both. I guess I should have had a question for each of you, but
oh no.
Well, you can think about it as we ask this final one.
Yeah.
Okay. So we like to ask everybody, in the weirdness that is 2020, with our pandemic and lockdown and this new normal, what is something that is remarkable, hopefully good, maybe like a silver lining type of thing for you personally? And it can be personal or professional or anything really.
Let's see. So I'll pick something personal because I've talked a lot about my professional self. So when March rolled around and started working from home, and I moved to Colorado last summer, so a year ago, a little over a year ago. And, I started getting my routine, my activities, just my day-to-day life. And I think that when March came around and everything changed, I think it made me take a moment to reflect on, could I find a moment in a given day, a given week, and just really so that when I look back on 2020, I can remember and say, oh, I actually, I did something, that I felt proud of, or I felt good about. And I think for me, the first thing that I really picked up on in March was starting to explore cycling in Fort Collins. I hadn't done it yet. I'd been here and, maybe I'd ridden my bike around town, but I just really began to explore, and I challenged myself, could I find a new route to ride my bicycle on each time that I went out? And so for several months, every time it was like a challenge, a brand new route. And I kind of grew to know the city in a different way. And so that was
great,
really special.
That's awesome. Yeah, Fort Collins.
That's a really good answer.
Biking. Yeah.
And so I took lots of photos too. So now I will have those memories, even though this is an incredibly a sad time. And I think we're all nationally just in a state of mourning. So, but yeah, it is good to think about the silver linings too. And those good moments.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Carrie, so much.
Yeah, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for your time.
Yes. Thanks.
All right. You have a fantastic weekend, and maybe we'll check back in a year and see where you're at.
Sounds good. Happy hour to everyone.
Happy hour. Bye.
Bye.
All right. Before we head out, we've got just a couple of SoGES announcements. The first, as always, you can sign up for email updates to the Sustainability Happy Hour. We will send you emails reminding you when we're going to have these fantastic shows. And that's at sustainability.colostate.edu/sustainabilityhappyhour. I write those emails, and I promise I won't spam you with anything except for items. Is what we call the Sustainability Happy Hour, because it's like a secret, but it's not a secret.
It's not a secret.
And then we have an event this Tuesday, a virtual seminar on November 10th from 1 to 2:30 p.m. It is called Strengthening Sustainability Programs in Higher Education. And there are going to be two guest speakers, Chris Boone, who is the Dean of the College of Global Futures and professor in the School of Sustainability at Arizona State University. He was a committee member on this consensus report put out by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. And this report gives recommendations for how to strengthen sustainability programs in higher ed. And then also on that seminar with him is going to be Madeline Tyson, who works with the Rocky Mountain Institute. So it is free. You can get the link at our website, sustainability.collegestate.edu/event/sustainability-in-higher ed. And it's a Zoom webinar, so you can just register for that. And it should be really good. And then finally, we have a new course offering in spring of 2021. And we actually have a neat little video promoting it.
No big deal.
No big deal.
It's right here.
We've
We're not going to
got
actually show. We're not going to show it to you, but it features somebody you may know.
It features somebody pretty cool.
I don't know about that. Tully's not in it. My dog's not. It's me.
I know.
It's the class I'm teaching. It's Sea Level Rise in a Sustainable Future. It's amazing. I've taught it twice now as an experimental course. This is the first time it's a permanent course. And it's a ton of fun. So you should definitely take the class.
Yep. And check out this cool video, which will tell you more about it and how to learn more.
And then just to queue up for next episode, we're going to have Professor Scott Denning, who is in the Atmospheric Science Department here at CSU. But beyond that, he's done huge amounts of work in communicating climate change and what is climate change, what can we do about it, to really, really broad audiences. So this will be a treat if you can join us in 2 weeks from today for this show. That's right, 2 weeks from today. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep.
And that's right before Thanksgiving break?
Yes.
Okay.
I believe.
I think. I don't know.
It's on the 20th. Yep, right before Thanksgiving break.
Right before Thanksgiving break. So make sure to put that in your Trapper Keeper with like a little Post-it note sticking out so you know to don't forget. Okay. That's it. I don't think we have anything else.
I think that's it. Happy weekend, everybody. Thanks for joining us. And
thank you for joining us.
If you came in halfway through, you can always watch these. They're recorded on our Facebook and our YouTube channel.
Mm-hmm.
All right.
Okay.
Bye.